Hey guys, welcome to the Short Term Show special episode series on Shenandoah, Virginia. A couple things I want to hit you with first before we get into the episodes. One, current purchase prices and current income data can be found on our website at theshorttermshop.com. So make sure you check that out because that can change all the time. Also, if you guys want to hang out with us and just talk about short-term rental stuff, you can do that with us and 60,000 of our closest short-term rental investor friends at our Facebook group. Same title as my book, Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth. Make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast and all of our podcasts if you can, because that really helps us out. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Short Term Shop YouTube, and then also follow us on Instagram at The Short Term Shop. And if you're ready to buy a house with us in any of our 20 markets, you can email us at agents@theshorttermshop.com or really any of the avenues that I just gave you. Now let's get into it.
Short-term show, special episodes. It's Shenandoah. Let's talk about writing a contract today. Let's talk about buying a house, baby. And first disclaimer, number one, Cash Flow Carl. I am not a real estate agent. I know a whole lot of real estate. And here and happy to help with my main dude, Project Allen, Mr. Allen Taylor, who is a real estate agent. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great, man. Good to be here in the Shenandoah. Great weather. I mean, it's been hot here lately. I don't know. I'm timestamp. This is kind of this is August 2023. It's super hot down here, but it's still going to be in the Shenandoah.
Right. Yes. Same here. Not to talk about the weather, but it is a thing, man. It's 100 and something degrees where I'm at, and you blink your eye, it will be Christmas. But today we're going to talk about contract process. How do I get a deal closed? Is there anything weird in this market, etc.? So I guess let's start with that. Is anything out of the ordinary here, or is it pretty cut and dry?
Well, we'll get into this as we go through the episode a little bit. There's a couple of peculiarities about buying properties here in Virginia in the Shenandoah region, but there's nothing that sticks out as like completely different or completely unusual or entirely unique to Virginia. Okay,
cool. What about negotiating? Like I said, let's start with earnest money. What do you recommend there? And again, obviously it's going to change based on the climate. You know, we went from a really, really heavy seller's market to what has now become, in my opinion, buyer's market, but the sellers aren't ready to admit it yet, kind of. And again, if you're listening to this podcast any other day than today, who knows what kind of market it'll be. But in general, what are we seeing on earnest money?
Earnest money, you're seeing about 1%. That's pretty typical throughout the entire region. There were times during the pandemic when there was just this crazy rush in real estate, you were seeing people putting a lot more down towards earnest money deposit, trying to be the first in line to get their offer accepted. But I don't think we're in that same environment. And anyway, the Shenandoah is kind of outside the DC region where most of that craze was focused. So you're going to see 1% earnest money deposit is fairly typical. If you're really, hot to get a property, you can put down a little bit more, but it's, generally 1% is pretty typical.
Okay. Is it going to be refundable, non-refundable?
Great question. Yeah, it is refundable. I mean, it's going to depend, it's going to hinge on the contingencies, but yes, it is refundable. And there, as of right now, there is not any non-refundable portion. So there's nothing that goes hard until after you're past the contingencies.
Okay. Both buyer and seller have to sign a document to get it released, or is it an automatic release? Or depends on the contract?
So typically here in Virginia, yes, both parties have to sign a release. In most cases, that's not going to be a huge issue, but it is something you need to be aware of, that both parties typically have to sign a release to get that money turned back to you.
Okay, cool. Furniture. Let's, I guess, first of all, do they normally come furnished? Are they furnished in most cases or not?
So it's always negotiable. If you're looking at properties that are going to be in a resort area or a typical, short-term rental market, like there's particular counties, regions out here where that is very common to have furniture included in the sale or, essentially left out of convenience for the seller. And that is typically treated, you want to put that in a separate bill of sale. So lenders are not going to include the value of any furniture in the mortgage. That's not something you want to bring up with your lender. It's like, hey, can we get this included? That's not something you want to ask. That's not a question you want to ask your lender. I would say that. But it is typical for people to leave furniture behind, and they'll sometimes mention that in their property listing. They're happy to leave stuff behind. So yeah, if that's something you're interested in, you can definitely put a separate bill of sale together for that. So it'll go hand in hand with the contract, but it'll be a separate part of that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's pretty common for most vacation markets, I think. And the truth is, the furniture doesn't have any value as far as the real estate transaction is concerned. And you also have to keep in mind that it might not have any value, period, other than the fact that it would be easier to get your house up and running with. It is used furniture after all. And the seller is not very likely to come back from Cleveland to pick up a whole semi-truck worth of furniture. So in a market where short-term is the norm, that is pretty common for it to come furnished. Which comes with, some things of its own. What do the sellers have? Oh, go ahead.
I would say some of those gift horses, don't consider like left behind furniture as a gift or a blessing. Sometimes that furniture, if it's been in short term rental, it's going to have seen some rough use in many cases. So don't count on that being stuff that you're going to keep long term. You might be able to get by with some of it, but even if it's being left behind, does not mean it's the best furniture, does not mean it's in good condition, does not mean it's something you want to leave behind for your guests. So even if it's, come furnished, don't count on that being stuff you want to stake your reviews on for that property.
Absolutely. Yeah. Used couch, you get a little, what about contingencies? What are the contingencies of the contract in general?
So contingencies, you've got the home inspection contingency, which includes radon, a home inspection, and a wood destroying insect inspection. Is generally what kind of the three prongs you want to do that. And in this market, you definitely want to do all three of them, especially if radon. If you've got any part of the property that's below grade, or even if it's above grade, you definitely want to do that. And the home inspector, you definitely want to get that. And I highly recommend that for, home inspections, you, the buyer, owe it to yourself to be there during the inspection to get a full, a good look at the property. Make sure that you're asking good questions. Make sure that you ask, like, if there's any questions you're unfamiliar with, you definitely want to be there, because that contingency is going to protect you in the case that there's anything wrong with the property, anything seriously wrong that's going to be a major concern for you or your lender. There's the home inspection contingency, and that's typically anywhere between 7 to 12 days to get that done. So you definitely want to be on the ball for getting your home inspection in there. And you're also going to have like the financing and appraisal contingencies. Those are fairly typical. It's probably something you're familiar with if you bought property in any other state. Financing is going to be, again, you will need to make sure you've got lending set up, or at least on the rails before you put an offer in. That's going to be a kind of a precondition with you and your agent. If you definitely want to make sure you have your lending online and going to meet that contingency. And again, that's going to be like a 10 to 12 days. Or actually, in financing conditions, you want to go with probably like a 21-day contingency, just to make sure that things are lined up. Some lenders, it takes a while to get an appraisal out there or an appraiser out there to do an appraisal and get that all lined up. And that's something you want to keep in mind. And the appraisal contingency is going to happen at about the same time, same pace as the financing. There's not much you can do there's here in Virginia, you can expedite some appraisals. I don't know how it is in other states, but you can expedite it in certain cases.
Okay, cool. Now, again, just to clarify, the radon and the wood insect inspections, those are generally going to be an additional fee. Yeah.
So oftentimes you'll find home inspectors that will roll all three into one. So you'll find some home inspectors that'll be able to do radon, or they'll have a subcontractor that'll come out there and do that. They typically, in this area at least, they'll have somebody separate. You'll need like a pest control company or something like that to do a wood destroying insect inspection. Occasionally you'll find a home inspector who's going to be licensed to do that, but generally they just do the home inspection. Radon can be an additional fee, and then the wood destroying insect inspection is typically it's a smaller additional fee, but it is worthwhile. And then another thing you want to keep in mind with like the home inspection contingency is that in some places where there is a well or a septic system, that is also a separate contingency you want to be aware of. So if your property that you're looking at has a well and a septic system, definitely make sure your agent is keeping an eye on that, making sure you have that contingency in place, because that can make a big difference.
Just working on my hair day over here. So radon in general is, in my experience, is more like for basement situations. Obviously, you're going in the ground. It's a gas. I don't know too much about it, to be honest, because most of my markets don't have that. And I think most short-term shop markets in general don't have that. So that is something to be aware of. What happens if I do get radon on what happens if radon does turn my inspection? What do I do? Is there a way to fix that?
Yeah, generally there's some steps you can take for remediating that. That often involves installing some kind of ventilation system in the space where the radon was detected or where the levels were a little bit elevated. That's a negotiation point you can take up with the seller. You can ask them to contribute some towards, the remediation system, and that's definitely something you want to be aware of during that process. And generally, the home inspectors, or the rate on inspection, you want to get done as soon as possible, because that's something you'll have a limited negotiation period. So there's an inspection period during which you can conduct the inspections, and then there's often, here in Virginia, there is a negotiation period during which you can negotiate any kind of concessions that the seller might make to remediate the situation. And then after that negotiation period, there's what's called an election period, where the buyers have the right to essentially back out of the contract if they can't find a mutually acceptable agreement, or they can continue with the contract with the agreement in place over what concessions were made.
Yeah, very good info. Is there a difference between offering as is and removing the inspection contingency altogether?
So offering as is, you mean like where the property listing says this is being sold as is?
Yeah, or if I just want to go ahead and offer as is, I know the answer, so it's a trick question. But if I just want to go ahead and offer as is that slightly different than removing the contingency? And the answer is yes. I'll go on that if you don't. I mean, I'm not an agent, so you take that one. I just offered a billion times. So,
yeah.
Sometimes I will offer as is, but then, anyway, the answer is if you offer as is, you can still get out on inspection. You just can't ask for any cash or concessions. But if you offer, or if you remove the inspection contingency, then it's like the inspection doesn't exist. You have to close it. You can still inspect, but it doesn't matter with the negotiations or the contract. You still have to close it whether you inspect or not. I've never done, I personally never, again, not an agent, but I've personally never done removing the contingency. I have many times, especially when things were super hot a couple years ago, as is. I've done that, but that changes my offer as a buyer. And it really only, to me, it's more effective on a house that is, in a little bit of disrepair. Maybe it was already like a long-term rental. And I see that a lot in long-term rental, where somebody's moved out, put it up for sale, and it needs stuff. It needs flooring, it needs paint, it needs a refrigerator. But the seller knows that. So the seller, in that case, doesn't really want like a first-time home buyer coming in there and saying, oh man, I got this inspection, it's got all this crazy stuff, it needs new floors. The seller of a rental house is going to be like, yeah, you should have known that. So in that instance, oftentimes all as is, just to let the seller know, hey, I'm not some stupid, pardon my language, but, first time home buyer that doesn't know what I'm doing. I understand that it needs floors and carpet. Here's my number, and I will not, come back and try and hit you with all this knick-knacky crap. And sometimes sellers appreciate that. Now, if the seller is a first time as a buyer, the seller, in that circumstance, I find that the seller only cares what the number is. So that depends on the buyer, right? The seller. So if the seller doesn't know what they're doing, a lot of times you're better off hitting them with the bigger number and then waiting for the inspection to come back and then blaming it on the inspection as to why their house is a piece of junk at that time and trying to get a couple of bucks. It's almost a roll of the dice because sometimes you can have a homeowner that, a primary homeowner that does know what they're doing and doesn't want to deal with the bad carpet and the busted fridge. And so they would like the as is. So you're rolling your dice a little bit there. But anyway, go ahead on that.
Yeah, I'd say here in Virginia, there's a couple options. Yet you can forego the inspection contingency. I never recommend that. And I don't think it, especially if somebody's buying a property remotely. I never recommend that. I mean, having your agent go and take a look at the house is not the same as an inspection. I would never recommend foregoing an inspection contingency. There were people who were doing that here in the Northern Virginia area where I'm based out of. There were people who were, desperate to get a properry. And so they'd chase after it. They'd forego all kinds of, they'd forego their financing and appraisal contingency and the home inspection contingency. And it was to make their offer more competitive, and a lot of times it worked. But taking a big risk there. So you can buy it. You can offer as is. You can do what's called an inspection only, or information only contingency here in Virginia, where it gives you the right to back out if you don't like the inspection results, but you cannot negotiate as far as getting concessions from the seller to do any repairs or anything else like that. So you can do a full contingency where you have the right to negotiate repairs. You can do an information only inspection, or you can essentially forgo the inspection altogether if you want. But again, never. I don't recommend that personally.
Okay, got it. Speaking of, let's talk about inspection. How many days on an inspection period? How many days to negotiate to the period? All that kind of stuff.
So I'm going to say for the home inspection contingency, typical between 7 and 12 days, depending on your agent, depending on the market. 12 days is not is generally more than enough to get done whatever you need to get done for a home inspection contingent. That includes the radon, that includes the home inspection itself, that includes wood destroying insect inspection. That should give you plenty of time. Now you want to make sure that you're on the ball. You might have a home inspection coming up in the next little while. Generally out here, for home inspectors, a 3 to 5 lead day or a 3 to 5 day lead time is perfectly all right. They can usually get out there within that time frame, and a lot of times they'll be able to give you an inspection report within 24 to 48 hours after the home inspection. They'll send you a PDF report. Same thing generally with the radon; those usually go together with the home inspection report. Wood destroying insect inspection depends on the person you're going to be hiring for that. Sometimes they're a little faster, sometimes a little slower. So you want to make sure that you're getting that done as soon as possible, well within the inspection timeline.
Got it. We already talked about radon and additional inspections, so we covered that. Pretty cool. And then never offer on tons of properties, then terminate, that kind of thing. I never really understood that. Why in the world? Now, if you've got the power to go buy 6 houses, offer on 6 houses. But if you're only going to buy one house, offering on 6 houses is probably not a great idea. That's at least in my opinion. But acting in good faith, what do you have for me there?
Definitely want to echo that. You definitely don't want to start making offers on tons of properties or offering more than what you can afford and then back out over some technicality. Your agent's not going to appreciate that. And the listing agent on the other side of that is not going to appreciate that either. And you're gonna make yourself a reputation you don't want. And your agent's probably going to want to avoid situations like that in the future. So just keep in mind, like, act in good faith. If you're offering on property, be sure you're good for it, and make sure it's one that you're really interested in. Now, if during the inspection contingency something comes up that you did not expect and nobody knew about ahead of time, that is a legitimate reason to back out of a contract. That's totally fine, but offer in good faith. Make sure that the properties you're making offers on are ones you're interested in, that you're good for, and that you have sincere, authentic interest in picking up.
Appraisals. What do we do when an appraisal comes in low? Can we terminate? Do we renegotiate? What do we do?
So absolutely. So that's a great question. Appraisals are another opportunity for the buyer to either renegotiate with the seller what the asking price of the purchase price is, or you can back out at that point if the appraisal comes in much lower than the purchase price. Depends on how you craft that the appraisal contingency. So this is part of the the financing and appraisal contingency here in Virginia. And it is it can be a major negotiation leverage. Sometimes you'll have listing agents pressuring you to forego that, but again, I don't recommend foregoing contingencies if you're. I just don't recommend it. It's a great protection to keep in place. Now, so the appraisal happens, and say like you've got a property that came in, you negotiated it at like $550. That's the purchase price. The appraisal comes in at like. They say it's only worth, $540 or $530. You can show that to the seller and say, hey, look, I've got this, appraisal contingency in place. It allows me to back out, but I will come down to that purchase price. So I'll meet you at like $530, what the appraisal says. And oftentimes you'll see sellers that are just, willing to go with the appraisal value. And it's a love-hate relationship that sometimes we have with appraisers. Often, sometimes they come in above, sometimes they come in below, and your lender has to go with what they say. So it's a mixed ball game, but oftentimes it's a major negotiating point with the seller to come down in price. And something to keep in mind. It's a great protection to have in place here in Virginia.
And it also greatly depends on, again, buyer market versus seller market, which we've had such huge swings in that in recent past. It's hard to even know what's going on, So I've had, years ago, I had appraisals come back a little low, and the seller would come down, or maybe meet you in the middle, and they're ready to be done with it because it's process. So let's just get this thing over with. And if it was only a few grand or whatever. And then there was a period of time where we saw almost every single offer had. Every offer I was making was like no appraisal contingency. I'll just take this thing no matter what it appraises at, that kind of thing. And then you got to pay the difference if you're financing. And that was crazy. That was too crazy as a buyer. I like to buy real estate when the appraisal contingency is off plate. I'm like, what? let's take it easy here. And now we're swinging back around to much more normal. And again, that's one of those things. It depends on where the market is. In 2021 was so crazy that it like skewed everything a little bit. So in other words, if you're coming into real estate in 2021 for the first time, you might not realize that that's not normal, and that means that good things are coming your way, because you definitely don't want that to happen on a regular basis. Alan, backing up just a financing contingency. What if my bank says they don't, like talk about that. How does a financing contingency work? And can I get out of the contract and for any reason? How does that work?
So the most common way to set that up here in Virginia is if you've got a financing contingency in place, the lender will order the appraisal. They'll go out and do the appraisal, comes back for a certain amount. And at that point, you have the ability to either negotiate with the seller for a change in price, or depending on the contingencies and how your agent filled it out, you may be on the hook to cover the gap between them. So if you offered to purchase at like, 615 and the appraisal came back at 600,000, you may be on the hook to come up, cough up that extra 15K out of pocket. So make sure your agent knows how to put that contingency together. But if your lender, for example, is, if they're not going to, if you don't get approved for that loan amount, for whatever it is, they will often, to be able to get out of the contract at that point, you have to have the lender come up with a lender, essentially a denial letter saying that I am not able to approve this, this purchase at this, for this loan amount for this particular purchaser. And you will have to send that to the listing agent. You'll have to demonstrate that there is actually a cause for you to not, this is the financing contingency. If you could not obtain financing for any reason, they have to, you have to produce that letter to show to the other side to be able to, get out on that contingency. And that's and without that letter, that'd be a bad faith move on your part. And if you definitely don't want to have your loan officer do something that's going to put their own license at risk. Luke, I don't know if you probably have some additional input here as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you can't buy the deal, and the bank's going to not give you the loan, then you don't buy the deal, but you definitely have to have documentation. I see that all the time where basically you're down to your last out and it's the financing contingency. But the bank doesn't want to, the bank's not going to say, hey, you can't buy this house unless you actually can't buy the house. And so sometimes a seller or a buyer will say, hey, Mr. Bank, can you give me a letter that says I can't buy this house? And the bank's like, well, you can't, so you gotta be careful of that. Act in good faith, do the right thing. Let's go back to seller disclosures. What do they have to disclose? Do investment owners have different disclosures from primary homeowners and things like that?
So no, if it's a residential property, and Virginia is a non-disclosure state, so the seller does not have to disclose very much, if anything at all. There's very few like corner cases where they'd have to disclose something. Sometimes it's in connection with like a septic system contract. Occasionally they might have to disclose something like that, or if there's like if it's in like a military airstrip noise zone or something like that, they may have to disclose it. But most everything else here in Virginia, you do not have to disclose. And there's a huge statement you have to sign when you put an offer together that you're acknowledging that it is a non-disclosure state, that you are on the hook for doing your own due diligence and making sure that this property is a good fit for you. So a good reminder to keep in all those contingencies in place so you have a chance to look through the proproperty, do all your due diligence, make sure that there's no surprises.
That's actually pretty cool. I mean, listen, I don't do it. Just don't do what I say. But I'll be honest. A lot of times I don't even look because I'm, especially if I'm going to the house, because I'm like, man, this seller doesn't know anything about this. I know more, but I've been in this house for 2 seconds and I can tell you more about this house than this seller, just because the average Joe just doesn't know a lot about real estate. So, don't get all up in arms. This is just me. Again, I'm not an agent. I'm just a buyer, but I'm not going to sit there and like scrutinize what he put on the seller disclosures. So it has this and that. A lot of times I'm like, wait a minute, the dates on these are not even right. This HVAC is this old and this kind of thing, So I personally just don't really care too much what the seller has to say. In most cases, I'm going to get in there and form my own opinion based on the extent of my career and the knowledge that I have and historical data. And that's pretty cool. I mean, does it come in handy? Maybe to a certain extent. But I don't think I would bother me at all to not have that. So no big deal there.
Yeah, I want to foot stomp that too, because I feel like there's a lot of people who are buyers who are always asking me like, why are they selling the property? Why are they selling the property? It's a very popular question
all the time.
And it's almost like they expecting like them to be hiding like bodies in the basement or something like that. Why are they trying to offload this property? It looks so good. Why are they trying to sell it? There could be 100 reasons, 1,000 reasons somebody's selling a property, and most of those are not going to be material to you. It's not going to make a difference. So, their motivation or their reason for selling, it could be that they're trying to 1031 into a different thing, or that, they lost a family member, their medical reasons, all these other things that are not going to be material to you in purchasing a short-term rental property in that area. So asking why they're selling it, generally, I would say generally is not a great question to ask, just because, the answer is not going to matter. Or if you ask a question, it's just, you're not going to get a satisfactory answer. So I don't know. Luke, mate, what do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I see that all the time on the internet. Again, I'm not an agent, so I don't have to deal with this firsthand with my own clients or anything. And I will say, when I was a buyer, when I first started, that's one of the things I was kind of like, you worry, but now after you do it enough times, it just becomes old hat. And the truth is, there's a million different reasons why they're selling the house, and not one of them matters to the buyer. Not one of them. The answer is never, this house is a dud. It's never going to make any money. Don't buy it. If you can't figure that out before you even offer, then this business probably isn't for you. You've got to figure that part out before you get yourself deep enough on this house. Any other reason that is beyond your control, because that in your control. The one thing that these buyers are worried about is in their control. If the house is a dud and it doesn't make any money, or it's not going to be perfect for and again, it doesn't have to make money. It doesn't have to make money in short term. That's the beauty of this. If you want to go out and find a really nice house that your family wants to go on vacation and get some tax benefits and things like that, this is a great asset class. But if it doesn't work for you and your family, you need to know that and be smart enough to know how to spend. In other words, what you're trying to tell me here is that you went out and bought a stock you knew nothing about, and then the next day, just because the universe shifted and didn't like you, it went down the crapper. Now, again, stocks to me are even more. I know it's a ridiculous example, but that is more realistic that could happen than it would with a house. So don't go buy a stock that you're worried about going down the crapper. Buy a nice and even stock that stays the same all the time, or, goes up a little bit. Different types of stocks for different types of buyers. Same thing here with houses. And let's list some reasons. Getting divorced, probably one of the most common. Somebody died. Those are the two most common: divorce and death. Now, also that's just regular real estate, regular old houses. And vacation home real estate, you're more often than not dealing with folks that have a lot of money and they don't even need to care about this house. It's either this or the boat. Which one are we going to buy? And they ended up with the house. So at a certain point, you might get sick and tired of that boat, but there's somebody right behind that's eager to get out that boat out there and get it running and have some fun with their family, So, or maybe it's a situation where they've had it long enough and it's got some equity. They want to move it into something bigger. Maybe they're moving into another market. Maybe they're 1031. There's a million different reasons. The only one that the buyer needs to be concerned with is the only one that they have any control over. There you go. Drop the mic on that. What else do we need to talk about? A final walkthrough. Did we skip anything? Or let's go to final walkthrough and then we can recap.
Well, yeah, before we
okay, go ahead.
I want to footstep one other thing you said about that. So like all the questions about why they're selling. Oftentimes I get people, asking like, hey, it's common to buy a property out here that has been previously used as a short-term rental. It's very common out here in these markets, and it's probably common everywhere else. And one of the questions I frequently get is, hey, can they provide like business receipts, for the past year or something like that, what their, income statements. And I can understand like the want to like see how they've done as a business, but that like, you got to realize they're selling a house. They're not selling a business. And then your management style, like the way you're going to run this house is not going to be in like the way that they've run things is not necessarily going to be an indication of how you're going to do at the house. You might be, you're probably going to be able to do it better if you're self-managed remote, owner. You're going to be able to, you have some advantages that they might not have had, or you might be more motivated to get things done and advertise it better than they did. So asking for like, records of how they've done, their past, sales revenue over the past year or so, Not always a guarantee. They don't have to disclose that. There's no reason that they have to. They might choose to, but it's not a guarantee. And even if they do have it, it's not necessarily accurate information that I would recommend people base any kind of like forecasts on.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. We've said it a million times around here. Rental history doesn't matter, but I understand when you're new, and it is, in commercial real estate and long-term rental, you need to see that lease. You need to see what's going on right now. It doesn't mean that you're not going to. It's the same thing though. You're going to improve it, but you actually have. That's one thing that makes short-term easier. When you've got a 10-unit apartment building with 10 leases, it's making this much money, but I need it to make this much money, and it should make this much money because the market has changed and this guy's not keeping up with things and it needs some work and the tenants are not paying enough, and you got to go in there and it's like a 3-4 year process to get that thing turned around. All the tenants got to end up, you give them rent increases. Some of them will end up leaving. Some of them won't. Some of them, it's a whole thing. With short-term, there's no lease. There's no commitments of any kind. So when you buy the house, it's coming empty and you get to instantly raise those rents to whatever you need them to be, or put in new appliances and raise the rents, put in new flooring and raise the rents. Can't do that in commercial real estate. Can't do that in long-term rental. It's a long, drawn-out process. Yeah, interesting point there. I'm glad you brought that up. Final walkthrough. Talk to me about final walkthrough, and should I go to that? Should I not go to that? I have mixed feelings on the subject.
So I always recommend that people go and do the final walkthrough as much as they possibly can. I realize that's not always going to be possible. Somebody might have, family obligations come up, but I always recommend that if you're buying the house, that's your opportunity to make sure that it is in the condition that the seller told you it would be at the time of sale. So and part of the home inspection contingency is that you can stipulate that the home is going to be in the same condition that it was at the time of the home inspection. So essentially, when you're doing a home inspection, you can say the house has to be in this condition at time of closing. And this is a good opportunity to have your home inspector go back and do a re-inspection. Usually they don't. It's not near as expensive to do it to do the re-inspection or final walkthrough as it is to do the initial inspection. They're usually a small nominal fee. But I highly recommend you do that just to make sure that the house is still in that same condition, that they haven't, ripped out drywall or, taken out like doors or, something weird like that. Oftentimes, if the property is being sold furnished in some kind of way, they're planning on leaving behind furniture, occasionally they might stipulate that they're going to be taking some personal items out. You want to make sure you're aware of that. And if there's any other issues that come up, you definitely want your home inspector to be aware of that. Your agent is not going to be the best person to do this. They're not a home inspector. They're a real estate agent. And they're not going to be the person that you want to have in charge of doing something like that. And they don't want to be the person who's liable for, maybe missing something that the home inspector. So again, I highly recommend you get your home inspector out there again to do the final walkthrough. And that when they do that final walkthrough, you be there with them. It's not always possible, but I always recommend it.
Yeah, that's what I have mixed feelings on this one because, I do think, especially if you're new, you need to get to the final walkthrough. It's difficult. Most of the time we're buying vacation homes at a distance that's very long, and it's almost like you just went through all that trouble in airplanes and all this, and just for 15 minutes, it's really all it is. You just walk through and check it out and make sure, you could do some more inspecting, but it's a little too late at that point for that kind of thing. If you're all right, this is where it gets even more weird. If you're brand new, go to the house. Do yourself a favor. Give yourself some warm fuzzies for the final walkthrough. This is where it gets weird because the gut instinct is at that point, just wait until it closes in a day or 2 days and stay there and then get all your stuff done. Do your 6 trips to Home Depot a day and all that kind of thing. Problem is that with a short term, from the minute it's closed until you're ready to get in there, and there's some weird stuff can happen. The property manager is involved. Maybe they forgot to cancel the guest. You're never going to get keys. Nobody ever gets keys in short term because there aren't any keys. Everybody uses a push button deadbolt. And then a lot of times they forget to give you the code, or the deadbolt's dead, and you got to do all this running around just to get into the house. Or, also let's not forget you got to turn utilities on. That might take you 3 or 4 days. So you're trying to sleep in a house that's got no water. So it's a weird thing there. If you can afford to take the whole week and knock all that stuff out at once, that would be great. But yeah, for me, definitely consider sending your home inspector back over there. It's usually a fairly low fee to get them to kind of re-inspect and maybe even check a repair proposal list and see if that things got done. Now, that being said, I do want my agent to be there, especially if I'm going to be there. Just give me some opinions on everything and give me some warm fuzzies, especially if I'm brand new. But again, yeah, I don't think it's right to expect your agent to just go over there and videotape everything and make sure that it's going to be perfect and up to your standards, because an agent's not a builder, not an inspector, home inspector, and it's too much to ask of them, quite frankly. Again, they should probably be there, but to ask them for detailed advice on structural integrity and things like that is not a good idea. That's not their gig. Hopefully it's not gotten that far at this point anyway. We should have already taken care of that kind of stuff. But I always want to encourage you to go to Final Walkthrough. Always. There's been a couple of times where I forgot and I was mad about it. And there was a period in my career where I didn't go to them at all. I found that they were kind of a boring waste of time. And then I came back around to that. And now I do go to them again, Be present. It's your first investment. It's your first, if it's the first house you've bought that you don't live in, I would recommend personally to be there for as much of any of this as possible. At the same time, you don't want to go too far and be up everybody's backside, that kind of thing. But all right, man, cool. What else did we miss anything?
I think that about covers it. I mean, you and I both probably have stories, fun stories about inspections and final walkthroughs and all kinds of stuff like that. But yeah, especially if you're new, I highly recommend you get out there and take a look at it, and it's a great opportunity to kind of build a list of what you need to do to get this thing up and running. So yeah, I think we covered all the bases. Yeah,
and if you want any help on this subject and would like to buy a house, that's why we're here at Short Term Shop, theshorttermshop.com. You can get directly to Alan. Just click that button on there that says talk to an agent right on the main page. Can't miss it. And we would really be honored to earn your business in Shenandoah. And thanks for hanging with us. And don't overthink it.